From the dawn of history, humanity has lived under the shadow of prophecy. Whispers of a final war, of nations gathering for the ultimate confrontation, echo through the sacred texts of three great faiths. Among all these prophecies, one name stands out above the rest, a name both feared and mysterious: Gog and Magog. Who are they? Where do they come from? And why does their shadow stretch all the way into our present day, into the year 2025, where believers and skeptics alike look nervously to the horizon of unfolding events? The Bible speaks of them with chilling clarity, yet also in veiled mystery. In the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, the prophet describes a vision of the latter days, when a great horde led by a figure called Gog of the land of Magog will march against Israel. The description is vivid. Vast armies from the north, covered in shields and armor, descending like a storm upon the land. Yet this is no ordinary invasion. It is described as the climactic rebellion against God himself, a moment in which divine wrath is unleashed not just against men, but against the forces of evil that drive them. Centuries later, in the book of Revelation, John picks up the same imagery. After the 1,000 years of peace, Satan will be released from his prison, and once again he will go out to deceive the nations, Gog and Magog, gathering them from the four corners of the earth to wage war against the people of God. The imagery is staggering, a multitude so vast, like the sand of the sea, surrounding the camp of the saints. But just as quickly as they rise, fire falls from heaven, and they are consumed. Two visions, separated by centuries, yet united in pointing toward the same mystery. Gog and Magog as the embodiment of the final rebellion, the armies of chaos rising against the order of God. But who or what are Gog and Magog? Are they nations? Are they symbolic forces of evil? Or are they something in between, a blending of history, prophecy, and the unseen spiritual war? Scholars, mystics, and rulers have debated this question for millennia. Some point to ancient tribes that once lived on the fringes of Israel's world, the Scythians, the northern raiders, the barbarian hordes that threaten civilization. Others see Gog and Magog not as a single nation, but as a recurring archetype, the enemy of God's people in every generation, resurfacing under new names, new empires, and new banners. In Jewish tradition, Gog and Magog came to symbolize the last battle of history, the final test before the coming of the Messiah. Rabbis spoke of a day when Israel would stand surrounded, when the nations would unite not by alliance, but by hatred. And in the Islamic tradition, the Quran speaks of Ya'juj and Ma'juj, unleashed at the end of days, breaking free from their ancient barrier to bring devastation upon the earth until the divine decree ends their reign. The story transcends cultures, echoing across the Abrahamic faiths, each recognizing Gog and Magog as a force too great for men to stop, a force that only God himself can destroy. And yet, the question remains, why do these prophecies still resonate in our time? Because when we look at the turbulence of the modern world, wars between nations, rising superpowers, unrest spreading across continents, the imagery of Ezekiel and Revelation feels less like distant poetry and more like tomorrow as headlines. Nations to the north of Israel align in strange partnerships. Global coalitions rise and fracture. Weapons of destruction now exist with the power to wipe out cities in a single strike. The armies that Ezekiel saw as countless horsemen could now be envisioned as missiles, drones, and mechanized war machines. The scale of devastation possible in the modern world makes the prophecy more terrifying than ever before. Some interpreters look at Gog as a symbol of specific nations in today's map: Russia, Turkey, Iran, or a coalition of powers that emerge from the north. Others suggest Gog is not confined to geography, but is the embodiment of all world systems that set themselves against God. Magog, then, becomes the spiritual realm behind the nations, the ideology of rebellion, a spirit of defiance that spreads across borders, and infects kings, presidents, and rulers alike. And when the two unite, earthly power and spiritual deception, the result is a storm the world cannot contain. The book of Revelation intensifies the picture. Gog and Magog are not just limited to one age. They appear even after the millennial reign of peace, showing that rebellion lurks in the human heart, waiting for a spark. When Satan is loosed, he deceives them once again, proving that even 1,000 years of peace cannot erase the hunger of darkness from those who reject the light. This gives the prophecy a timeless weight. Gog and Magog are not just ancient tribes, nor only future enemies, but the recurring face of opposition against God, rising in every generation until the final one. And so, history becomes a stage where Gog and Magog appear in different costumes. In the days of the Roman Empire, early Christians saw the legions of Rome as the embodiment of this prophecy, an empire that set itself against God's people and sought to crush the church. In the Middle Ages, invasions by nomadic tribes were seen as echoes of the prophecy. Even during the Crusades, both Christians and Muslims invoked Gog and Magog to describe their enemies, convinced that the battle of the end was at hand. Every age has looked at its terrors and found in them the shadow of Gog and Magog. But now, in the year 2025, that shadow feels closer than ever. Global tensions rise in the Middle East. Alliances form in ways that mirror Ezekiel's description: Persia, Cush, Put, and the nations of the far north. It is not difficult to imagine how a sudden spark, a war, a treaty, a betrayal, could ignite the powder keg and set in motion events that look eerily like the words of the prophet. Technology ensures that such a conflict would no longer be limited to armies marching on horseback. It would be a war that shakes the entire earth, with consequences no nation could escape. Yet beyond the geopolitical stage lies something deeper. A prophecy of Gog and Magog is not merely about human armies, but about spiritual forces that move behind the scenes. The nations rage, but Scripture reminds us that it is the unseen powers, the principalities and rulers of darkness, that guide them. Gog and Magog are not just enemies of Israel. They are enemies of God. The final battle is not merely territorial, it is cosmic. It is heaven versus hell, creator versus creation gone astray. And so the vision expands. Imagine Ezekiel's storm clouds not only as soldiers, but as ideologies sweeping the earth: materialism, lawlessness, rebellion against all forms of truth. Imagine Revelation's number like the sand of the sea as a picture of humanity itself, united in defiance, gathering in the ultimate attempt to dethrone God. This is why the prophecy has never lost its power. It is not confined to one culture or one age. It is the story of humanity's rebellion brought to its climax. What makes the prophecy of Gog and Magog so unsettling is not only its scale, but its inevitability. The Bible does not ask if the battle will come. It declares that it will. The armies will gather. The nations will rise. The deception will spread. But in the midst of this, another truth shines even brighter. The God who declares the end from the beginning is never caught off guard. The same passages that describe Gog's rise also describe his downfall: swift, decisive, and absolute. Fire falls. The enemy is destroyed. The rebellion is crushed. But here lies the tension. Between the rise and the fall, between the gathering storm and the fire from heaven, humanity must live, must watch, and must choose. For the line between Gog and the people of God is not only drawn between nations, but through every human heart. Will we be swept into the rebellion, or will we stand firm in the truth? This is the power of prophecy, not simply to tell us the future, but to confront us in the present. Gog and Magog are coming, but their shadow is already here. Every culture that exalts itself against God carries their mark. Every leader who builds his throne in defiance of heaven carries their spirit. Every heart that whispers, "I will not serve," echoes the cry of rebellion that began with Lucifer himself. And so the story continues, moving from Eden to Babylon, from Rome to the modern age, from Ezekiel's vision to John's revelation. It is a story still unfolding before our eyes. The names remain the same, but the faces change. Gog and Magog march through history, and even now, they wait at the edges of prophecy, ready for their final hour. Yet the mystery of Gog and Magog does not end with Ezekiel and Revelation. Over the centuries, countless voices have tried to pierce the veil, asking, are these prophecies describing one climactic battle, or many? Some see in Ezekiel's vision a prelude, a foreshadowing of Armageddon, distinct but connected, like two acts in the same divine drama. Others argue it is the same event told in different words, seen from different angles, echoing across generations until the final confrontation is revealed. This tension has kept theologians debating for centuries, each era trying to locate itself within the story. The Jewish apocalyptic writings that circulated before the time of Christ expand the narrative even further. The Book of Jubilees and later rabbinic commentaries describe Gog and Magog as nations kept in reserve for the end, like actors, hidden backstage, waiting for their cue. The Book of Enoch, so influential in the early church, describes fallen angels imprisoned until the final judgment, stirring echoes of Revelation's vision of spirits released to deceive the nations. Across these writings, Gog and Magog are not simply one tribe or army, but the embodiment of all chaos, restrained until the appointed hour. Early Christian thinkers inherited this tapestry and wove it into their own understanding of history. Church fathers like Jerome and Augustine debated the nature of Gog and Magog. Were they literal tribes beyond the borders of the Roman world? Or were they symbols of the nations raging against God at the end of time? Augustine leaned toward the symbolic, that Gog and Magog were not bound by maps, but represented the universal rebellion of humanity. In his City of God, he warned that the enemies of truth would always gather in the last days, regardless of where their banners flew. But as empires rose and fell, the interpretations shifted. When the Mongol armies thundered across Asia into Europe in the 13th century, many in Christendom were convinced they were seeing the fulfillment of prophecy. Chronicles from the time speak of people trembling, whispering that the barrier of Alexander the Great, the mythical gate said to hold back the tribes of Gog and Magog, had been broken. The invaders from the east, with their strange customs and unstoppable might, seemed to many like the very hordes described by Ezekiel and Revelation. In that moment, prophecy was not a distant hope or fear. It was the terrifying present. And it did not stop there. In the Islamic world, the Quranic description of Ya'juj and Ma'juj was often tied to the same Mongol invasions, seen as a divine test unleashed upon the earth. Some linked them to earlier tribes of Central Asia. Others believed their release marked the beginning of the end. Once again, Gog and Magog became the lens through which people interpreted their times, each generation convinced that the prophecy was breaking into reality before their eyes. The medieval imagination built entire legends around them. Maps drawn in Europe and the Middle East placed Gog and Magog at the edges of the known world, behind impenetrable mountains or walls. Travelers told stories of great nations, locked away until the end, cursed to rise only when the final trumpet sounded. Even in the age of exploration, when new lands were discovered, explorers sometimes wondered, had they stumbled upon the territories of Gog and Magog? The myth had seeped so deeply into the human psyche that every frontier became a possible stage for the final prophecy. And yet, beyond geography and history, there lies another dimension, the symbolic. Gog and Magog do not only represent armies and nations. They are the face of rebellion, chaos, and dissection itself. They are the archetype of humanity's refusal to bow, the collective rage of kingdoms that would rather war with their maker than submit to him. Their numbers, described as like the sand of the sea, point not only to vast armies, but to the countless ways in which rebellion multiplies, in politics, in culture, in the human heart. When we look at the modern world, the shadow of Gog and Magog takes new forms. Some see it in global alliances, where nations with little in common unite in opposition to God's people. Others see it in the ideologies spreading across the earth, movements that reject morality, truth, and the very image of God in humanity. Technology, once a tool of progress, now becomes a weapon of deception, with information itself turned into a battlefield. Could this too be part of the prophecy? Could the armies of Gog and Magog be both physical and digital, both military and ideological, swarming across the earth in a storm of chaos? The question grows sharper as we step into 2025. The Middle East remains the epicenter of tension, a stage where prophecy and politics intertwine. Nations to the north strengthen their alliances. Ancient Persia, modern Iran, grows in power and influence. The echoes of Ezekiel's list of nations feel unnervingly familiar. And yet, at the same time, the prophecy warns us not to look only at maps and treaties. Gog and Magog are more than geopolitics. They are spiritual realities that transcend borders. The armies may march in flesh, but the deception begins in spirit. What makes the prophecy so haunting is its inevitability. Whether through nations, ideologies, or unseen powers, Gog and Magog are destined to rise. Their appearance is not the question. The timing is. Scripture presents them as the final test, the ultimate gathering of rebellion before the Creator brings his judgment. It is as though the story of humanity cannot be completed until every corner of defiance has been brought into the open, until every mask has fallen, and the true face of rebellion stands exposed. And still, the mystery deepens. Why does Revelation place their rebellion after 1,000 years of peace? Why would God allow history to reach its conclusion, then permit the enemy one final uprising? Perhaps it is to reveal that even in perfect conditions, the heart of rebellion cannot be tamed without surrender to God. That even in paradise restored, there are those who will choose darkness over light. Gog and Magog then become not only the last enemies of Israel, but the last proof of humanity's desperate need for redemption. This is why the story of Gog and Magog refuses to fade. It is not locked in the past, nor confined to one nation. It is a living prophecy, shaping the way we see history, the way we interpret the present, and the way we anticipate the future. And as the world moves deeper into uncertainty, as wars, rumors of wars, and global unrest intensify, the question presses upon us with greater force. Are we watching the shadow of Gog and Magog rise once more? But the enigma of Gog and Magog stretches even further, spilling into mythologies beyond the biblical world. Ancient Mesopotamian texts speak of chaotic hordes that would one day pour forth from the north, breaking the boundaries of civilization. Greek traditions told of tribes at the edge of the earth, monstrous and untamed, who would one day surge forth in fury. Though the names were different, the themes echoed the same warning. A storm was waiting on the horizon, one that no wall of stone or empire of men could hold back forever. The Jewish mystical traditions of the Middle Ages gave the prophecy new dimensions. The Talmud mentions that Gog and Magog would rise against Jerusalem at the very end of days, gathering all nations into one final assault. Later Kabbalistic writings described them as the embodiment of cosmic chaos, forces unleashed not only against Israel, but against the divine order itself. These traditions portrayed the battle not as a clash of armies alone, but as a collision of universes, heaven and earth, order and chaos, spirit and flesh. The Islamic world, too, preserved the narrative. In the Quran, Ya'juj and Ma'juj are described as nations locked behind a great barrier built by a righteous king. At the end of time, the barrier would crumble, and the world would be flooded with their destructive might. Islamic commentators through the centuries debated who they were, some pointing to Turkic tribes, others to Mongols, still others to peoples not yet revealed. For Muslims, Jews, and Christians alike, the story of Gog and Magog became a kind of prophetic mirror, each generation gazing into it and seeing the reflection of their own greatest threat. And history itself seemed to reinforce this cycle. When plagues swept through Europe, killing millions in the Black Death, rumors spread that Gog and Magog were behind it, unseen forces of destruction released from their prison. During the Crusades, both Christians and Muslims accused the other side of being the hordes of Gog and Magog unleashed upon the Holy Land. In the age of exploration, when strange new civilizations were encountered across oceans, some whispered that perhaps these were the long-hidden tribes returning. The prophecy, in this way, lived not only in Scripture, but in the imagination of every age, always reshaping, always alive. The deeper we look, the clearer it becomes. Gog and Magog are more than enemies. They are a pattern. They are the recurring symbol of rebellion, appearing wherever human pride unites against the will of God. Sometimes that rebellion wears the armor of an empire. Sometimes it spreads in whispers through culture and philosophy. Sometimes it hides in the machinery of wealth and power. And sometimes it waits, restrained, until the hour of release has come. This brings us to the modern age, where the prophecy takes on even stranger forms. Today, war is no longer waged only with swords or armies, but with technology, information, and fear itself. Some scholars see Gog and Magog reflected in global systems of surveillance and control, networks that bind nations together under the illusion of progress, yet carry within them the seeds of domination. Others see it in the rise of artificial intelligence, predicting a day when machines, built by human pride, become tools of deception beyond anything ancient prophets could have imagined. Could the gathering of nations be both physical and digital, a merging of geopolitical power and technological might, moving the world toward a climax written long ago? The prophecy also presses against the spiritual atmosphere of the present. We live in an era when the boundaries between truth and falsehood blur, when entire populations can be swayed by a single narrative repeated enough times. Revelation describes spirits going out to deceive the kings of the earth. And in our time, deception moves not through whispers in courts alone, but through the endless flood of voices across global media. In this sense, Gog and Magog are not only armies on the battlefield, but the storms of ideology and manipulation that shape the minds of billions. And still, geopolitics cannot be ignored. The nations of Ezekiel 38 and 39, Persia, Cush, Put, Gomer, and Togarmah stand like shadows in the background of current headlines. As alliances form in ways eerily similar to the prophet's list, many ask whether the stage is already being set. Is Gog a single leader rising in the north, or a coalition bound together by shared defiance? Are we watching ancient names come alive in modern nations? Or are we glimpsing the deeper spiritual truth that rebellion always gathers under many banners? This tension fuels the mystery. The prophecy does not give us exact maps or timetables. Instead, it gives us patterns, and those patterns echo louder as the years advance. The armies of Gog and Magog could emerge suddenly, in a crisis that reshapes the world overnight. Or they may already be among us, moving quietly, shaping the course of nations until the appointed day when they stand revealed in full strength. And this raises the most haunting question of all. Is the world of 2025 closer to that day than we imagine? Wars simmer on the edge of explosion. Economic systems shake with instability. Nations form alliances not of peace, but of survival, preparing for storms they sense but cannot control. And behind it all, the prophecy whispers, Gog and Magog will come. Their number will be vast. Their deception will be great. Their rebellion will be global. The story is not finished. It stretches ahead, pulling us forward into a future that feels closer with each passing headline. And though the names are ancient, the power behind them is not confined to history. Gog and Magog rise again and again until the final rising that prophecy has promised. From the visions of Ezekiel to the thunder of Revelation, from the whispers of rabbis to the proclamations of prophets, one truth has echoed through the ages. Gog and Magog are not just ancient names. They are a timeless warning. They represent the gathering of rebellion, the unity of nations and spirits in defiance of the Creator. They are the storm at history's edge, waiting, watching, rising again in every generation until their final hour. We have seen how the story begins in heaven, when pride turned angels into demons. We have traced it through the Nephilim, the Watchers, the plagues of empires, and the restless centuries of Jewish, Christian, and Islamic tradition. We have watched as history itself, from the Crusades to the Black Death to the modern age, seemed to bend toward their shadow. And now, in the age of technology and global power, the patterns speak louder than ever before. Gog and Magog are more than armies. They are the embodiment of deception, chaos, and rebellion. They march in the pages of Scripture, but they also march through the corridors of our present world. Whether they come as nations in arms, as ideologies of defiance, or as unseen spiritual forces, their goal has never changed: to wage war against God and His people. Yet for all their fury, the end of the prophecy is never uncertain. The book of Ezekiel declares that fire will rain upon Gog and Magog, that their hordes will fall upon the mountains, and that the nations will know the Lord. Revelation shows their vast army surrounding the beloved city, only to be consumed in an instant by the fire of heaven. The power of rebellion will be crushed, the deceiver silenced, and the story of human defiance brought to its close. And so the arc of prophecy is clear. History is moving toward a final confrontation. Gog and Magog stand not as distant myths, but as signposts pointing to a day of reckoning. They are the last rebellion before the dawn, the last storm before the eternal calm. This is the story of Gog and Magog, a prophecy that spans millennia, a warning written into the fabric of history, and a promise that no matter how dark the night, the light will break through. The end is not yet, but the signs are here. The shadows gather, the nations stir, and prophecy whispers louder than ever. Gog and Magog are coming. And when they rise, the world will know that the hand of God still rules history, and that His kingdom, unshaken, unbroken, eternal, will stand forever.